Hi, my name is Heather McGowan. We're going to talk about why nonlinear careers are the future of work. So the questions we will answer: what is a nonlinear career anyway? We're going to talk about why you should stop asking people what they're going to be when they grow up. And what are the actual elements of a nonlinear career? At the end of this video, you will understand the power and potential of nonlinear careers. So let's define a nonlinear career. A nonlinear career is one that combines many different roles, industry types, sometimes employment types, and definitely educational types. I'm going to use mine as a way of an example. So I'm a public speaker. I didn't go to school to be a public speaker. I never said public speaker when somebody asked me what you want to be when you grow up. I didn't really even know that was a thing until about 15 years ago. So I started off in art school where I studied industrial design. Industrial design is basically product design, but you spend a lot of your time thinking about what problem am I trying to solve? How do I really understand the person who's using it? So a lot of those skills are still really relevant today. From there, I worked in product design. Then I went and got an MBA. And then I worked in boutique investment banking. So I learned a lot about what's valued in the market and how you scale an opportunity and what people invest in, why things grow, why things retract. Then I went into strategic consulting. So I used a lot of my design thinking skills in business. Then I worked in academia. I worked in academic strategy. I built a new college focused on innovation. And then along the way, I started realizing I was spending most of my time in the last 3 or 4 roles explaining to people how work was changing, because I could see it, and I could see it from the supply side from working in academia and the demand side from my consulting. And so I wrote an article on LinkedIn in 2014, and 100,000 people read it in 24 hours, and I started getting speaking requests from all over the world. The first one was in Australia. It went really well. They had 40 speakers, 39 of them were well-known. There were one that wasn't, that was me. And then they ranked the folks, and I ranked number 2 out of all 40. And the video of that went a bit viral, and now this is all I do for a living. So I think a lot of people are gonna carve their paths like that. It was nonlinear. It's all of the elements along the way informed me to it. And that may be true of you too, even if you span from finance to healthcare to arts. You're going to bring some of those pieces together, and I think that's what makes a great nonlinear career. So let's look at the old mental model. The old mental model was education, career, retire, and this visual might be particularly helpful. So whether you went to university or not, education was that first third of your life, to become educated. Then it was done. And then you got on the career escalator, or ladder, and you rode it all the way up to the retirement, which was by design supposed to happen after you died. When they picked the retirement age, they picked it that was longer than life expectancy back when they picked it. So they never intended to pay people for 30 years, which is what's happening today. So you rode the career ladder up, you collect a pension, and then by design you died within a year or 2. Success measures here are, did we codify and transfer the right predetermined skills and existing knowledge, like train you to do something that you would do repeatedly for the 30-year career you had until you collected your pension and died. That was the idea. That was really the model. Now the life expectancy, which was 63 when they actually picked 65 as the retirement age, then became 67, then 67 became, today it's 78. Now let's look at the reality today. Life expectancy is not 90 yet, but it will be soon. Education becomes learning, because learning implies there's no end state. Work becomes leverage, because you're going to be leveraging that learning across the whole lifespan. And then longevity replaces retirement, because the reality is we didn't plan for, save for, nor can we afford, not just financially, but socially and cognitively, to check out for 30 years. And it looks more like this visual. So you're going to have a series of engagements. They may be within some company, it may be all within one company. It still happens. But largely you'll probably have many different work experiences. And with them, you're going to be learning constantly. And then later in life, you're going to remain engaged. That's the reality. Success measures here are, can you learn, adapt, and create new value? Can you understand market opportunity? Can you stay in perpetual beta? And can you adapt as jobs become workflows, which are much more fluid? Here, as you can clearly see, learning becomes across the entire life in all aspects of your life, not just for work, but also for your longevity. So we need to rethink our systems of education. Right now, our systems of education are designed to be a bit of a sorting process. They start at a very young age figuring out who's going to college or university, right? And they figured out who can get the right answer on the test. So after kindergarten, if you look at this research, and some of this is quite old, but it stands up. we've lost the majority of our creativity. If you look at this visual from, age 5 to high school, we've stopped asking questions. In kindergarten, we're encouraged to ask why and explore our feelings. After that, we're not supposed to ask questions. We're just supposed to find the right ones to answer. That wrings all of our enthusiasm out and actually declines our engagement. And actually, recent studies have shown that a simple chatbot can beat a high school senior, might not be able to beat a kindergartner, because we're better at divergent thinking. We're better at what's called alternative use tasks. So if I said to you, can you come up with 1,000 uses for a paperclip? You might be able to come up with 10, but a kindergartner could easily come up with 50, because they're used to saying what if, and we need to get much more of that. So it's almost like this model and this visual should flip. Let's look at learning across the lifespan. When we think about nonlinear careers, we tend to think, well, what did I learn to do? Because that's all I can do, because learning was packed in the first layer of our life. And learning was packed in the first layer of life because that's the peak of our fluid intelligence. That's the peak of us rapidly learning and learning new pathways. But that's not the end, it's the beginning. Our crystallized intelligence peaks at about 60. That's your encyclopedic knowledge and your wisdom. But our executive function peaks at 29. Think about that for a second. You're asked to take out mortgage level debt to pursue something you picked in high school when you've been exposed to very few things, when your prefrontal cortex hadn't even fully formed. You don't even have the cognitive ability to make those decisions. That doesn't come to you almost 29. Your ability to concentrate. So if you're starting to wane right now and you're under 43, it's not your fault. Concentration peaks at 43. Reading emotions at 48. So if you get things wrong, you've had a little trouble early in your relationships in your 20s, it's not unusual. Human skills appreciate with exposure and experience. Learning new information. Now, this is deeply learning new information. It doesn't peak till later in your 50s. Now, if you play Wordle like I do and get my butt kicked with all my friends because they're all older than me, it's not your fault if you're under 67. There's a good argument here for learning across the lifespan because there's plenty of cognitive peaks across the lifespan, and we could design our educational experiences around those cognitive peaks rather than just trying to cram it in the first third of our life. Especially in a lot of ways, we're not cognitively prepared to make some of those decisions. So let's ask that question. What do you want to be when you grow up? It's a pretty absurd question when you think about it. Because when you're asking a young person, it's what they've been exposed to. And if we start looking at some of the most popular jobs today, most of those didn't exist 10 years ago. We ask other people like, what are you going to study? What's your college or university major? What are you training to do? Again, you pick that at an age where you've had very little exposure and fewer cognitive resources to do it. And then the first thing we ask each other is, what do you do? Now let's break all three of these questions down. What do you want to be when you grow up? Let's look at some of these top jobs and how long they've been around. An AI or machine learning specialist is one of the hottest jobs right now. It's only been around 10 or 15 years. And I would argue a lot of it's really been in the last 5 years. So if you ask a young person 15 or 20 years ago what they wanted to be when they grew up, they couldn't even conceive of this. See how absurd that is? The second most popular job right now is ESG, so environmental sustainability and governance. So people who work on sustainability stuff, that's only been around for about 10 years. And then the third top job right now is cloud architect. That's arguably been around for maybe 10, some say 15 years. All three of these top jobs did not exist when you would have asked a young person who's into those jobs today when they were little if they wanted to do those things, because it wasn't even an option. So we ask young people to pick a major and myopically focus on it and take off mortgage levels debt. It's kind of absurd because when you look at the research, and there's not a ton of this on how many people work in the field of the undergraduate major, it's compelling. 30% of people work directly in the field of the undergraduate major. Now, if they're funneling out anything else, they're missing all the opportunities and the adjacencies in which they could work. 20 to 30% of folks work in some adjacency. And then when you look at trade schools, you've got a higher correlation there because you're actually being trained to do something very specific. So about 75% of people enter whatever they're being trained to do in like a career school or professional school. So thinking if you're being trained to be a vet tech, or you're being trained to be a mason, or you're being trained to be an electrician, chances are good you'll start off in that. They don't have data as to whether or not you stay in it, but about 75% of people go in it. So there's a greater argument there. Now let's look at what we do for a living. 40% of us are, and I think that number is low, 40% of us are going to have involuntary job loss. Involuntary job loss is a layoff, could be a firing, could be a reduction in force. It makes you feel terrible and you feel like there's something wrong with you, but it's not, it's normal. When you look at that 40%, the majority of it is in the private sector. So if you work in the private sector, that number is much, much higher. I think we should be preparing people to lose their jobs. I wrote an article once, let's prepare university graduates to lose their jobs, and faculty members, let's teach them how to keep theirs. With the idea that faculty needs to be more adaptive and connected to market realities, and university students have to understand that they are going to lose a job and that getting over that is a really important part of life. And part of being in a nonlinear career is realizing you're going to be switching and pivoting because maybe your skills that you are trained to do become less relevant. Most of us will have 3 to 5 different careers across our lifespan. We're not preparing for that adaptation. And statistically, you'll have 12 jobs over your career. So how are you preparing? A nonlinear career is a great way to think about how do I create the portfolio of those 12 jobs. So involuntary job loss is not something we prepare people for, but there's been some really compelling studies that involuntary job loss is harder to recover from than the loss of a primary relationship. Why? Because we've taken all those questions. What do you do? When are you going to be when you grow up? What's your major? We've focused on this fixed occupational identity. And when you lose that, you lose a great part of your identity. And some folks never recover to the same level of well-being. That is something I think we can fix. So one way to look at nonlinear careers is something called DELIs. They're deeply embedded life interests. This is a concept that came up in the 90s, and at the time it was sort of pie in the sky, but I think it's incredible relevance today. Because you can take any job and break it down to having a component of one of these deeply embedded life interests. So the things like application of technology, quantitative analysis, theory and conceptual thinking, creative production, counseling and mentoring, managing people and relationships, enterprise control, that means running the show, and influence through language and ideas. So if you take these 8, and you look at what are different jobs and how are they composed of these 8? So say a salesperson. A salesperson is a combination of a lot of things, but the 2 primary things I think are managing people and relationships and enterprise control. A human resource person is counseling and mentoring and managing people and relationships. A CEO or a CFO, someone who's in the C-suite, could be enterprise control, definitely, quantitative analysis, and often, the way a lot of companies are today, also application of technology. Now let's look at entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are usually a spectrum depending on where your focus of your entrepreneurship is, but it is definitely application of technology today, enterprise control, and it's often creative production as well. Now me, I'm a keynote speaker, a job I didn't know that existed when I started way back in art school in the late 80s. So for me as a keynote speaker, it's influence through language and ideas because that's how I communicate. It's theory and conceptual development because I'm synthesizing a lot of information that's unfamiliar to some folks. And for me, it's also application of technology because of the area in which I speak. So I want to talk to you about nonlinear careers and the emerging social contract. So the contract for work used to be, study to be something, be that thing. And then your work contract was trade your loyalty to me for the security of employment. Now that promise hasn't been fulfilled for many decades for most folks. So it's an absurd promise. So I've come up with another promise. And the promise has what I call the 5 M's. First, there's money. You want to be paid fairly. And we're seeing increasingly transparency around that. If you're not paying someone fairly, they're going to go to another opportunity. Next, it's mission. Are you part of something larger than yourselves? When we're seeing a loss of purpose and a loss of belonging in a lot of other areas of their life, people are looking for their work to be more of their North Star. How is this job making an impact in the world? Or how is this company making an impact in the world? And then it's meaning. Is the work I'm doing meaningful? Meaning for me personally and meaningful towards that mission. What am I working on? Who is it serving? What difference is it making? Then it's mentorship. I always say pick a boss, don't pick a job. Pick somebody from whom you're going to learn. Because any job you're going to start is going to change as soon as you get in it practically. Because it's important to learn as it is to earn. I say learning is a new pension. That's how you create your future value every day. If you're not learning at work, you're becoming less valuable. So seeking that mentor who can help you learn. And then finally, membership. Work is the last place of belonging for a lot of folks. If you're interested in this, I have a whole series on loneliness. So if you look at these things together, that's the 5 M's of work. Hi there, my name is Heather McGowan. I'm a future work keynote speaker. And all that means is I go around the world and I speak to companies and organizations and help people adapt to the changing nature of the future work. I help leadership. I help organizations think about their culture, their purpose. I help people navigate the loneliness epidemic, which I think is impacting work way more than people realize. I think it's a greater threat than artificial intelligence. If you'd like to learn more about me and get the free gift, you can go to my website, heathermcgowan.com/gift. There's a link in the show notes. And I'll give you the introduction in the first chapter of my book, The Adaptation Advantage, which might be very helpful for you. I want to share my value with you. So that's why I make all these videos. Some of these are made in a professional setting like this. Many of them are made in my home. Some of them are stage clips. So you can go to my YouTube channels and see me answering a number of questions about leading through uncertainty, navigating the loneliness epidemic in work, lots of videos on the future of work, lots of stage shots of me explaining things to different companies around the world over the last 10 or so years. So you can go to heathermcgowan.com.